October 1960, the British relinquished pretenses over the area known since 1914 as Nigeria. This followed years of nationalist agitations from the founding fathers like Herbert Macaulay, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, Eyo Ita, Denis Osadebay, Akintola, Okpara, and Tafawa Balewa. It took several decades of constitutional evolution from Sir Hugh Clifford in 1922, Arthur Richards in 1946, John Macpherson in 1951, and Oliver Lyttleton in 1954, and Nigeria's independent constitution of 1960. Were these preparations enough, or did other factors hijack the fate of Nigeria after independence, throwing her into economic, political, and social quagmire? The election crisis, the census crisis, the pogrom, the military intervention in 1966, and the eventual civil war between 1967 to 1970. Did Nigeria recover from these unwarranted detours, or is it safe to say that these events made or broke the country? This is the Eastern Eye. I'm Alex Obodo. Welcome to the Eastern Eye, a program that X-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. Joining me tonight is Comrade Fidelis Edeh. He is the former deputy president of the Nigeria Labour Congress. Ezudonboka, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the Eastern Eye.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for having me. Happy independence.
All right. So, the first things first. From all accounts, Nigeria should have had their independence in 1957. If all the records we have and everything that happened just before that time is anything to go by. But it eventually happened in 1960. Some people think it came too soon. Are you in that school of thought that independence came too soon in 1960? Or it came at the right time in 1960?
Well, Alex, thank you. And the idea or the expression that it came too soon is part of narratives of trying to have recollections without understanding the process through which the Nigerian state as it were was constituted. So if you say it came too soon, and knowing, just like you captured, the various constitutional amendments that were made up to 1941, when Nigerians started participating in a proper process of transition. The question would be, if the British had stayed more, what would have changed, particularly in the context of the political purposes of colonialism? If you looked at the process of amalgamation, amalgamation was not because Nigerians wanted to stay together. It was a British administrative convenience. If you looked at the British political developments, the public service, the judicial process, you would have seen that everything was geared to satisfy the intent and purposes of colonialism. For me, I think if they had stayed, the situation would have been worse, just like we had in South Africa. They would have gotten so entrenched, they would have occupied more strategic positions, that the regions would have completely been relegated to the background, particularly when we all understand that even regional politics did not also provide a kind of social and political cohesion that mobilized the people. So the issue is not whether we had independence too soon or too late. Even if we want to be persuaded by the logic of too soon, what has happened between 60 and now? Because if you felt that you got your independence too soon, are you saying you were immature? And after the number of decades we've had, you are still immature? So the truth of the matter is the Nigerian state, the process through which it was instituted, was never designed or planned to foster that kind of cohesion, cooperation, and entrusted responsibility in a manner that the people had initiative. Because it's only when you have initiative that you can begin to talk about risk taking. And when people begin to take risk in order to advance both in personal and collective interest, you will begin now to develop agility or zeal and commitment to those values you think will be in the interest of the collective. Because the advancement of their interest of collective is not just charity. It is built on the principle or doctrine of live and let live, given that society had moved from the era of might is right to the point that people understood that the golden rule was what advanced what is collective interest from which individuals draw their own. Even Adam Smith's classical theory of enlightened self-interest is embedded in that. So the reference to independence each time as to whether we missed the mark is just recollections, remembering. Now, what we ought to engage ourselves or should be discussing is how we have continued to degenerate. And when I say we, I mean the Nigerian states, that in 2025, the state of this nation, in terms of peace, in terms of security, in terms of civil liberty, in terms of political action that is targeted for public good, seems to be in deficit. Governance has even become more, in fact, what we have now never even operated under the colonial government. So I think independence at this point should no longer be something anybody will be discussing whether we got it too late or we would have still have remained. It's obvious that the 1957 issue, yes, if you also move to 53, the inaugural motion for independence, was it wrong for the North to have said, let's consult the constituents? And if you look at the practice of indirect rule, the principle through which it was introduced, you will discover that one of the issues, because we are short in understanding history, emotion seems to just be what drives narrative. And once you bring in emotion, people bring in Marx, religion, tribe, and what have you. The argument or the competitive conflict between Lugard or the colonial government and the nationalists remains today. The nationalists purported to want to represent Nigerians. They didn't even consult. That was just the issue. And we still have that situation today. In fact, it is clearly replicated in the relationship between the state governments and the local government. People who make laws for people they don't have contact with, where they don't even live, and preside over people who don't even make input on how they will be governed. So I believe that independence came when it ought to come. And what has happened is that the political system and the various destabilizing processes like the military coups compounded even the gains we would have made by trial and error. Because movement, in public administration, even in peace process, movement means agreement. Once people are in negotiation table and they stick to their points, you discover that they will never secure any progress. But once they begin to adjust, once they begin to move, it means that they will, with time, achieve agreement. And that movement would have been a process of mobilizing the people for cooperative and purposeful purpose. So I believe that, yes, independence came when it ought to, but the consequences of what followed thereafter seems to be a kind of negation to the whole purpose of Nigeria's independence.
Okay, so let's take a look at legacies now. The founding fathers of Nigeria, like I mentioned in the opening, they obviously left legacies. Are those legacies now things of the past? Are they still relevant to today's Nigeria? Can people in government today and those aspiring to leadership positions take a look at the legacies of the likes of Zik, Balewa, Ahmadu Bello, Awolowo, and take a look at them and the Okpara and say, all right, I think there's something here? Are we clinging on to the ideals that are considered good enough for us to roll on as a country? Or has all these legacies been moved to the background, as it were?
Alex, when we talk about legacy from the way you have presented it, it clearly points to the fact that we had deviated from the building blocks of national development. One analogy I will use here is something you'll find with the academics. When somebody is referred to as an expert, you discover that you are talking about the past, you are talking about history. There is no expert for the future. So the question will be, the patriots and nationalists you mentioned, their model of administration, were they building legacies or were they laying foundation for what they consider to be a march towards a greater Nigeria? I think it is that they were futuristic. They didn't set out to finish all the job. If our parents, who, if I use my own self, specifically, my dad never had the kind of formal education that would have enabled him to appreciate education and begin to train me and my siblings. But operating in an environment and seeing what education portended and what it offered, he felt he needed to make that sacrifice. So he wasn't doing a legacy. He wasn't building a legacy. He was embracing the future. He was embracing modernization. So if I've had education and eventually it comes to naught, how do you now begin to refer to the investment my father made as legacy? So this is exactly the challenge we'll have confronting us. And that is why you discover that we don't have sustainable development. Because the idea of legacy, as we have come to know it now, with starting from the Second Republic, but worsened from 1999, is that it has led to, one, not thought through projects, infrastructural development, programs that are not connected with the people, so that everybody thinks he wants to leave a legacy, rather than continuing with the march that have been set out in terms of trajectory. You may, in fact, there is no development anywhere, even personal, that is a straight walk. You will be confronted with twists, bends, You know, but the point is that there is a goal you are focused on. That you get tired is not the end of that struggle. And why we'll continue to refer to those initiatives that imparted life, whether you talked about agriculture, whether you talked about agriculture now with reference to the north and the east, even the west, because it's not as if when you talk about Okpara's exploits in agriculture that the other sectors were not thriving. No. Or you talk about free education in the west, that it means that agriculture and the others were not thriving. Or you talk about granite pyramid cutting in the north, it means that every other thing was abandoned. No. So what it means is that what they set out, and mind you, that these things were not things they were doing as individuals. It was governmental program. That's why the use of Western region, Eastern region, Northern region. And when you look at their achievement, you see how it is attributed to the government in situ as at that time. But today, you will see governors that will embark in programs that have no relationship with the lives of the people, no connectivity. You know, so the idea of legacy for purposes of just demarcation, the point is that when something is abandoned, how do you now even look at it as legacy? Because what it means is that it remains more like an artifact. Because assuming it's something that is operating, you know, you can now try to compare it with similars. If you take Okpara's agricultural policy, those who talk about it today are only remembering because it has been discussed. They see nothing except, for instance, in Enugu, if you go to Uzo 1, you will see an outline of what was set out. If you now go to Cross River, Akwa Ibom rivers, you will see things that if the subsequent government had even continued after state creation, we will not be where we are. In fact, it was when people say that oil money was a cause. I said no, it is the Nigerian people that turned it into cause. Because how could it have been a cause when God, in his infinite mercy, availed us all the resources we needed to move from most underdeveloped to most developed country? Because we were at a point, we were giving loan to other countries. Not even loan. Nigeria was donating, taking big projects. They do not host First Tag. Have you heard about First Tag again after the Nigerian version? So the point I'm saying is that a man, just like I used myself as an example, who, if I had ended up today as a drunkard, would you now blame it on my father, who had done everything, including sacrificing to give me a better life? So I think what we will do is to hold those who have aborted the struggle, the journey that would have made us self-sufficient, that would have improved human dignity. And you can see, if you look at the 1999 Constitution, which has continued from the Republican Constitution of 1963, you will see consistency in government focusing on the development of economic, social programs. Politics was not even something anybody was giving serious consideration, although people were expected to form parties and what have you. But if you even look at the era of tenure development plan, 5-year development plan and what have you, it was a deliberate program by government to continue to impact on the lives of the people through consistent programs. If Nigerian system had operated the way it ought to, the kind of situation which we have found ourselves using Dangote example will not arise. Not that I have anything against Dangote, because he has even done well to utilize the resources the Nigerian state during the Nigerian work are very good. There were people who cornered as much as Dangote, but frittered it away. But the point I'm making is that those who designed the Constitution, particularly the economic objective, section 16, and said that the wealth of this nation should not be vested in the hands of few. You can see the point. And if I continue to say it, I won't be tired, that the Nigerian Constitution never expected political parties with ideology. No, because the ideology is already imposed in Chapter 2. And if you go to Section 225, where the manifestos of the party have to derive from Chapter 2. So what ought to happen, just like what happened in the Second Republic, is that you go to that chapter. If it's housing, that will be the focal program of your party. If it's about education, this is what it ought to be. So when I make this point, and people who say that chapter is not justiciable, I don't think they are correct. Because if you now say it's not, they are not justiciable, why is it that the president has to pick ministers? Why is it that those ministries have programs derived from Chapter 2 attached to them? Why do they have the mandate? Why do they have to go to National Assembly to appropriate funds, in order to execute those programs? So, but what has happened is that we have politicians who, from 1941 to 1960, who never quite understand, or they didn't understand the struggle, the independence struggle, just like you reeled out the constitutional amendment. But it became worse from 1999. You have politicians that are emperors. In fact, they deliberately impoverish their people and turn around to begin to provide them succor. What St. Augustine, in his book, Confession, called benevolence malice. You impoverish a man, make him helpless, vulnerable. Then you turn around to say, oh, I'm sorry, you are poor, I'm now going to help you. Is it not laughable that Nigeria in 2020 still talk about, what is it now? These things they share.
Palliatives.
Relief.
Palliatives.
And all that. So I believe that what has happened is that we need to see how to rethink. It's a very serious challenge. And let me make this point, that ignorance has also played very point. A recent one that is embarrassing is the court's decision on the attempt by Professor Utomi to form a shadow government. If you have a man with the status of Professor Utomi, one of our best, internationally acclaimed, who does not understand the difference between a parliamentary system and presidential system. Then he took the court to now tell Utomi that it is in Britain with parliamentary system that practices shadowing government. You can now imagine even the intellectuals, the academics that ought to provide the intellectual and ideological bearing for citizens to QA. So we have become so agitated or frustrated that people just wake up in the morning and do whatever they like. When I had that judgment, in fact, when he started it, I said, is this a joke? But that it had to progress to the point of court pronouncement, it was a sad day for me. Because if this was a rabble-rouser, one can say, but for Utomi not to differentiate between a parliamentary system and presidential system, which we borrowed from America, tells you exactly how government runs in Nigeria. What it means is that if he had had an opportunity of being in an office he will also operate in a manner that will not have any regard to the Constitution. With due respect.
All right, we'll take a very quick break here. When we return, we'll continue this conversation with you, Comrade Fidelis Edeh. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Back to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV, a program that x-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. Comrade Fidelis Edeh, the military intervention in Nigeria politics has been described in many ways. Some say that it's the reason why the country is the way it is. A lot of people are saying that if the January 1966 coup was not bloody, maybe things could have turned different for Nigeria. Another school of thought is saying that, well, if that coup did not happen at all, maybe the political class will have learned their lessons and improve on whatever they did before that coup happened. So help us put these two scenarios in perspective, because it does appear that ultimately after the coup of 1966 and the counter coup of January and July, the counter coup of July 1966, Nigeria has never been the same. So those two coups, do you think that they ultimately defined whatever we now have, politically speaking, as Nigeria?
Well, Alex, that again will prompt me to want to repeat the point I made. But let me see if I can recast it in another model. When we talked about whether we had our independence too early. Without going into the negative effect of the coup when it occurred. When we talk about Nigeria, I'll say the geographical space, there's something we have to be clear with. Yes, I will define Nigeria as a geographical that geographical expression has become a reality because paths have crossed, people have mingled, so we can no longer deny that we have a country called Nigeria, even when we remain tribal. The question will be, because it is time we begin to even put to rest the idea of always trying to blame one event or one factor or another. The coup took place, the counter coup took place, the civil war took place. If you now extend it to the eastern region that bore the brunt of the entire scenario, can we now say, because we are not now talking about Nigeria, because apart from even when the colonial administrators were here, we still had how Nigeria was governed, how Nigeria was represented, how laws were made, and how it applied. So one would think, or one would have want to see it this way. Those who had the counter coup believed, one, it was reprisal. Secondly, they believed they needed to take back power. So to what benefit that power served the region? When the East, today as we have Southeast, continue to talk about marginalization, given my background, that I've always believed that the crisis of man is that of class. There's always, I think there is this biblical misrepresentation by the political minded. The aspect, the Bible in Genesis told us that God told man to go and conquer and subdue the world. He didn't refer to woman. He talked about things he had given woman with which to thrive. But it will appear that there are people who believe that that subjugation, that subduing, because subduing means to be able to turn, to be able to change something for beneficial use. Some political-minded individuals who have had the privilege of having roles have turned it into subjugation, oppression, exploitation, and today it is completely corruption. Because when people talk about Nigeria, whether under the military or the fact that we had civil war, can anybody point to me the region that have benefited? For instance, if we talk about slave trade, we don't even need to go far to see how Britain thrived. In fact, up to today, you can name certain families that have continued to prosper as a result of their participation in slave trade. So you can trace the proceeds. So can we say that? So the issue is not about military coup or whether, it is a class struggle. But unfortunately for us in Nigeria, we have a class that is unthinking. They have a class that is self-centered, and that self-centeredness is not even to develop themselves. That was why I made the point that despite whatever anybody feels about Dangote, how the state had supported him, even when we learned that at a point he was being given a special concession in terms of exchange rates. But I can tell you, if Nigerians who had had that privilege, particularly those who had had their hand in public tales, had invested 50% of what they have kept out in their communities and states, one is that the level of unemployment will not be as it is. I am into farming. I'm into rice processing. And I'm not big, I'm small. But Alex, there is no month I don't provide for about 15-20% who work with me, not by direct employment, but the fact they participate in what I do. I'm not talking about other adjuncts. So the point is that this idea of military intervention, civil war, and what have you, to what gain? That is who actually benefited from it. If you even look at the Southeast, you will discover that the Southeast thrived more immediately after the Civil War, when people were saying, which is a fact, that we were given 20 parts, properties were seized in rivers and what have you. Then now, we have a generation that are just lamenting and shouting marginalization. But if you look at the politics of the Second Republic, how come that the Igbos occupied the kind of positions such that at a point in this country, we had the vice president and the speaker of House of Rep? Does that sound like people who were defeated in the Civil War? What it means is that the Nigerian game is a game that people just come together to see how they can combine to make themselves better. Because people who talk about deliberate policy, if you use Obasanjo's government, for instance, we cannot deny that the Southeast played an effective role. To what benefit did they translate? Rather, we have in the Southeast governors, as soon as they finish their tenure, they become guests to EFCC. Do you know the kind of amount of money that usually are frittered away? Do you know the kind of money that is recovered and where it goes to? The only time I've heard about recovery or sending back to state EFCC for is in Delta. The one of Enugu, I didn't know how it translated. But when you recover money from a government that has been in power from 1999 and has succeeded themselves, and you return it to them. How do you, what kind of justice is that? You know, so the point I'm making is that we must, and that is the point, we must move away from this past recrimination. Either we are blaming the way we had independence, we had it too early.
That's right.
We are blaming the military coup, or we are blaming that we had civil war.
That's right.
If you take a look in the back, you will discover that the situation has been degenerating. It has been degenerating. So what lessons have we learned? You know, so for me, if you even look at it in terms of infrastructure and empowerment, I'm not, today, there was a time it was as if it meant anything to me, but today I've discovered it's a big lie. That does not mean I'm supporting military coup. I'm talking in terms of historical facts.
All right.
Nigeria have made more progress in terms of infrastructure under the military than civilian government. When you look at local government and the states, I was a labor leader under the military. I knew things that the military administrators could never attempt. I knew things. Under the military, you dare not divert local government funds. How dare? Here, I was very active in Enugu. I was part of when the state was created. But only recently, just in Enugu here, we heard that local government chairman met and had the governor receive a power of attorney to now run their local government fund. How did they derive that power? Did they return to their various ward and constituents to obtain it? But this is a constitutional issue. So how do you now begin to discuss this? And you now begin to attribute the fact to military coup, civil war? No.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we had those who were never even part of the independence struggle.
That's right.
Even that some of them were not born. I was not part. But the fact that I was active in the trade union movement availed me the historical consciousness.
That's correct.
And the fact that I was very, very active under the military, that the military was returned to barrack, you know, gave me a projection in terms of perception of what we expected democracy to be. But you have a crop of people who neither read, neither even engage those who may advise them, and they are not just interested. For them, governance is about the position you occupy.
That's right. We have.
Yeah, you're right.
We have just
the buildings you build.
That's right.
And what have you?
Comrade, we have just
about. I'm not among those who continue to blame our past.
Great. We have
I believe, as it is today, we are our own enemies and responsible for the current degeneration and the fact that Nigeria seems to be a place where even the next generation have lost hope in the system. And even the youthful generation seems not to even understand their role in democracy. So I think these are part of what we must begin to focus and move away. Yes, history is good, references, but like every other country, they make reference to the past to guide them for the future.
Yes.
It's not so in Nigeria.
I need to quickly,
with politicians.
Yes, comrade, I need to quickly ask you because we have about 4 minutes to go. It's about political participation in Nigeria. What has changed after 65 years? Would you say that Nigerians are more politically conscious, or has there been a drop in the political consciousness within the country? We have about 3.5 minutes to go now.
Okay, Nigerians have become politically aware, but not politically conscious. You know, to be aware of something is different from being conscious and understanding and knowing. If you look at the social media, if you look at activism, you will discover that today more Nigerians are engaged in what I call lifestyle struggles or activism. In fact, it has gotten worse with content creation. People sit in their bedroom or in their parlor and do analysis about what they know nothing about or have experienced. So because of that, you discover that there seems to be a lot of traffic, a lot of awareness for those who have access to social media space. But ask them whether they have ever been to their village meeting. So, in fact, we are more of urban tigers in the social media, because I can tell you that if Nigerians engage the spaces from where this exploitation and manipulation evolve, you will discover that it will not be so. One example which I will give, because I don't have time, is what happened in Enugu South. The recent election. I do not want to bother about the man in jail, but the point was clear that before this man contested the election, that he was never having any criminal issue. So if after the election he now had an issue and he found himself in prison, that will not stop a right that is already conferred in terms of the election. But rather than allow a process through which you would have gone to say, no, that a convict now cannot continue to represent, people tried to use manipulation to see how they can turn a victory that is already won. But because of the level of consciousness, you saw that it was not possible. And because of that, INEC realized that there is no way you will conduct this election without this man winning. And they had to declare him, because there was nothing that was new. They could have declared him the first day, the second time, the third time, before the fourth time. So it shows that a civic community that is conscious of their rights or civic duty is likely not to be manipulated. And the powers that be are likely not to confront them. But a situation where people keep quiet and people wait for their turn, and their turn that never come, waiting for crumbs, you will go to the localities, you will discover that certain people that hold certain positions, you will see somebody who is a youth leader of a political party, but the son is already a graduate from the university, unemployed, but he's a youth leader. You find women leaders, you find those waiting. They had lost local government election, but they are now being promised that the next term they will go. But the point I'm making here is that because of the patronage system people have acquiesced with, you discover that they are not even conscious, but they are aware. But that awareness amounts to nothing. So people are today politically retarded, politically ignorant, because they neither know the values of civil liberty, nor do they even know what is constitutional dictates. So for them, they are quest to personal preferences of those they think can assist them to the next level. But that is actually the source of their impoverishment and exploitation, and it is unfortunate.
I have to thank you so much, Comrade Fidelis said. There are lots of things to discuss. It looks like we've just scratched the surface. So obviously, I'll bring you back to discuss more, because we have not even delved into state creation and a great deal of other things that had happened, and the issues around defection and zoning, presidency, different things. But we'll pick another date and bring you back. Thank you so much. Okay. Comrade Fidelis said, the former deputy president of the NLC. Thank you for your analysis tonight on the Eastern Eye. That's the Eastern Eye for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, for another episode. My name is Alex Obodo. Happy Independence and good night.